was not me. Oh boy. I think we're gonna wipe.
Welcome back to the Mentor Roulette grind. This time, we're playing White Mage, and, well, the duty distribution is about as expected. That said, for duty 1, we start with next to the shoe, and we got a whole 21 seconds out of Aero. It is funny how some tanks will drag Bachman all the way to the NPC to leave more quickly, when using the menu will always be the fastest way to exit, although you lose out on a tiny bit of cash. For duty 2, we went to Hell's Lid, leading me to 2 tips right off the bat. The first one is related to this first pull of the dungeon. Awkwardly, you only get this one pack and there is quite a walk to the next pull. If you don't know a dungeon as a tank, a common approach to be sure you didn't forget something is to pull to the wall. On the other hand, if you do know a dungeon, an interesting detail about tanking with a White Mage healer is that the White Mage will only really be able to spread dots as long as you keep running. So finding a place to stop sooner so the White Mage can start using Holy is beneficial. Dragging a pack for too long or in an unusual way may also lead the White Mage to, intentionally or not, spread out the pack more by stunning it on the way. The tip here is mostly that there's a lot that goes into doing a pull well, and there may be things you're not thinking about that impacts your current group. The second tip is White Mage specific and has to do with lilies. At level 70, the only thing lilies do is cast Solace, which is a free and instant cure 2, which, when you need that, is not too bad. However, as this spell does not do anything aside from healing, it should be viewed more like, well, a healing cooldown with charges. In fact, since it costs a spell to use, ability-based options tend to take priority over it. Not to mention, if Regent's healing is good enough, then it heals for more over its total duration than Solace. So don't just use Solace because you have 3 lilies. Not until you have Afflatus Misery available. On the first boss, I did have a bit of classic White Mage greed where everyone got hit by an avoidable mechanic, and instead of healing up, I concluded that there wasn't any unavoidable damage incoming, so there was no need to heal anyone yet, only for the dancer to get clipped by a cone attack. Our dancer also had trouble with the line dashes on the second boss, so I assume they were likely a first timer. Aside from this, the duty went well. For duty 3, we went to new Dzemael Darkhold, and the dancer knew me. Hello! The duty went quite fast, and we actually, for the most part, pulled the duty exactly as if it was unchanged. Something worth keeping in mind as the healer, or if you're here as a bard, is that the Jerk Anglerfish is present in the first AoE pull, and shortly after the first boss, and it applies a physical vuln that can be removed with Ishuna. As anything but a White Mage, you can probably cast Ishuna and cover any healing you need with an OGZD, but White Mage just might not have the space to do that. Although White Mage can hope the Holy Stun just kills off the fish before it matters. Also remember for any AoE the party does take that while Medica 2 is not an option, Cure 3 is. For duty 4, we went to Sunken Temple of Qarn, a particularly rough level range for White Mage. A reminder for this one, too, is that Regen will heal significantly more than Cure 2 over its duration, so maintaining Regen, when the healing will help, is very valuable. In fact, while the tank is rounding up mobs, is a solid time to spread Aero, but also make sure the fight starts off with the tank with a recently applied Regen, so get as many stone casts as possible. Another tip here is when your only good healing options are Cure 2 and Regen, taking note of how much Cure 2 actually heals can be incredibly helpful. For example, I noted that my Cure 2 heals for about 700 or so pretty early on, and unless I absolutely had to, would only cast Cure 2 when the tank was missing more than 700 HP, so I didn't waste any of the heal. Now, thanks to the tank using stun smartly, the first boss didn't even get to use Mortal Ray, even once. This also came up on the final boss, which also turned out to be stunnable, leading to a very nice and reasonably fast Qarn run. Also, did you know that Astrologian, of all jobs, can solo Sunken Temple of Qarn synced? For duty 5, we were a 3-minute replacement in Vanguard, and the party was at least trying to progress without a healer. You love to see it. The first and the last boss in this duty have moments with no attackable target, which leads to some interesting optimization for White Mage, significantly more the first boss than the last. If you have any experience with Pictomancer, this will probably sound familiar. Lily spells costing you attack opportunities to spend the lilies is usually compensated for by Afflatus Misery doing as much damage as 4 glares on top of each other. Of course, using lilies for the healing when you need it is important, but in a lot of especially more casual duties like leveling dungeons such as Vanguard, with a solid tank, you just won't need the lilies to keep them healthy. Especially not a warrior, and in these cases, simply dumping all lilies you have stocked between fights to ready blood lilies is a very effective strategy. Additionally, while the tank is rounding up mobs, using Dia on each mob and then dumping lilies to do something with your GCD while running is also a way to work them in. Another option, which is where the first boss comes in, is if the boss has moments where it is entirely unattackable, dumping lilies there instead of a different time is also effective. The reasoning is that if you spend lilies while you have an attackable target, then the lily is replacing an attack spell, whether it be Dia, Holy or Glare. This is not a problem, since Afflatus Misery does so much damage that for the most part, it is worth it if the alternative was sitting on 3 lilies, or even sitting on 1 lily you could say. However, what's better than a 1-to-1 deal is a something for nothing deal, which is what happens when lilies are spent while you don't have an attack target. You are refunded a glare that you didn't have the opportunity to spend anyway. The first boss regularly becomes unattackable, making this an excellent opportunity to dump a lily or 2, especially if any party members need some healing at that time. The final boss, on the other hand, mostly just offers 1 opportunity when it switches between phase 1 and 2. Yet another convenient time to use lilies comes up on the second boss, which is the heavy movement sections during Search and Destroy. Since White Mage is somewhat limited in solid instant cast options, having a lily or 2 to dump here is a way to make the most of the time you have here anyway. It probably comes as no surprise that this duty went super well. A funny thing that did come up during the duty is that usually when I am a replacement, I try to determine why I am a replacement. Most of the time, the person I'm replacing just left for no particular reason, but sometimes it can be a problem with another player, and when the healer leaves, I look for tank issues. Granted, this replacement happened so fast that my only possible guess would have been, the tank didn't pull 2 packs immediately, but I'm pretty sure they only pulled 1 because the healer was missing. For duty 6 and 7, we went to Over the Shoelace, followed by Friendly Discos. And yeah, not much happened for either. Something briefly worth mentioning for the second one is that only the Gorbu is likely to live long enough to even bother using Aero. The rest, just use stone on the healthiest thing. For duty 8, we went to Dohn Mheg. The tank was quite something. I do believe I eventually mentioned how to interrupt, since the frogs cast a buff on a mob if you don't interrupt them, but this was just the tip of the iceberg. On the first big pull, the tank used both Shadow Wall and Rampart, leaving them with, well, nothing big for the second big pull. I don't think I saw them use CBN much either, not to mention they sometimes just sat on full MP for no reason. In fact, for every set of pulls, they seem to prefer to use all of their defensive cooldowns at the first opportunity, and then just not have much for the second pull, which makes things harder for me, of course. Remember, plan out your big defensive cooldowns, as you probably won't have both your Shadow Wall and Rampart for each pull, so use 1 for each, not both on 1. The one time where this quote-unquote send everything strategy ended up working well enough was the big pull after the second boss, as the tank ended up saving everything specifically for that. Oh, also, on the first boss, pretty much everyone got hit by the knockups, so that was pretty fun. For duty 9, we went to Aurum Vale, and this run went very fast with a tank that meters out their cooldowns well, and also felt confident pulling packs into the second boss where it comes with hardly any downsides. An interesting detail about the Aurum Vale rework that some may have overlooked is that the reason why the pull at the start of the duty might feel harder than before the rework is because of what mobs got moved where. In the past, there was a lily pack smack dab in the middle of the room. That one has been moved to the entrance to the boss room. This means you get 2 plant packs instead of just 1. Why this matters is that between all the mobs, some of them have mini tank busters they use every few hits, like the mushrooms on the left, and others just hit hard. The plants will both shoot at you and auto-attack you if you're within punching distance, meaning they effectively spam mini-busters on every swing. This wasn't a huge deal when there were just 2, but with 4? Another detail is that since those lilies have been moved out of the center of the room, I haven't tested it much yet, but running straight through the room instead of leaning left might actually be optimal for dodging the mushrooms now, and might come at little to no cost. Try it out, let me know how it goes. For duty 10, we went to Sunken Temple of Qarn hard. I imagine the tank was genuinely pretty new to the role, as over the course of the duty, I saw Thrill of Battle be used somewhat randomly, like twice. Rampart was used somewhat correctly on a big pull once, and then near the end of the duty, Hongang, Vengeance, and Rampart were all sent simultaneously, sort of indicating they didn't really know what to do with all these cooldowns. We still managed, of course, although we had some strange things happen. The second boss will, a few times throughout the fight, start a really long cast of 100,000 needles, which is a Hardened Rage instant wipe style mechanic. This is stopped by distracting her by doing a certain amount of damage before the cast finishes. However, very late in the fight, she summons an ad that uses Cact Guard on her, which essentially makes her unkillable until that ad is dead. If you don't pay attention and switch to the ad, 100,000 needles easily finishes casting. And we had a death right around then, which causes just enough of a distraction for us that it leads to a wipe. Also, a tip for the final boss. A handful of mechanics apply a stacking debuff, and when it hits a certain point, you get put in a coffin. Most of the mechanics that apply stacks are simply avoidable, but late in the fight, the boss targets a random player and chases them with a beam. To stop this mechanic from stacking the debuff, just stun the boss. For duty 11, we went to Keeper of the Lake with, by their own admission, a first-timer red mage. As far as I could tell, they were playing pretty well. They were using the reverse stone and fire procs, they were using AoE where AoE was needed, and were doing fast into slow spells right. So if they were making mistakes, they certainly weren't standing out. On the final boss, we had a close call where our DPS almost died, but then the ad phase ended and we finished up the fight. Also, I can unfortunately report that you cannot jump off the arena. For duty 12, we went to Aurum Vale again. Something I noticed on the first boss is that, at least for White Mage, due to not having Medica 2 and the arena itself inviting players to sort of spread out, making Cure 3 less helpful, the dot really starts to get scary if it's allowed to stack up. It didn't end up causing real problems, but I would have liked to have Medica 2. On the second boss, something funny also came up. Coin counter is entirely stunnable, so with a paladin or 2 melee DPS, you can choose any 3 mechanics the boss attempts to do and just nope them. However, 3 is the limit due to diminishing returns. The 4th stun will not work as the boss will be immune. In this party, seemingly, all 3 melees decided the boss wasn't allowed to do much anything, including easily avoidable mechanics. Boss does a frontal cone the tank has already sidestepped? Stun. Line AoE the healer easily dodges? That's right! Stun. So when the boss does a full circle AoE, one of our ninjas just gets splatted across the face with it. And lives because of Shadeshift. The ultimate disrespect to this poor boss. Just ignoring and disallowing everything. Anyway, aside from this funny incident, we cleared the duty very nicely. And finally, for duty 13, we went to Castrum Meridianum, and this team was just great. The ninja was doing proper bursts and only using dot on when there were multiple targets, the red mage was doing fast and slow casts and filling in melee combos, and the gunbreaker was also doing their defensives right while also getting some solid no mercies. However much you can do at level 50 anyway. This might not sound like much, but considering nearly every single Castrum Meridianum I get has at least one weird outlier, getting a whole party of players just doing everything right is a bit surprising. It does seem like healer queues are getting quite overwhelmed with leveling duties once again, and I continue to wonder what the best solution is to get interesting sets as a result. Just go tank more? Keep going healer? DPS? Each of these roles seem to have a quote-unquote dark side. That said, we still got some funny runs where there were things to learn, and we also passed 35/54ths on the way on the achievement. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to support me and my channel more directly, you can become a member like these wonderful people here. You can also alternatively support me through Twitch or Ko-Fi. Links in the description. You can also support the channel by letting the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, sharing, and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. Fun fact, Benediction has only ever received 2 changes since its addition. At the launch of Stormblood, its cooldown was reduced from 5 minutes to 3. Then, near the end of Stormblood, the enmity Benediction generated was reduced, which is pretty funny to think about when using Benediction on Sid and Castrum Meridianum still generates a hilarious amount of enmity.